Welcome to the podcast for Healing Neurology, where we talk about everything that can help heal your neurology, which is really everything from food, lifestyle, and medicine to nature, culture, and politics. There's no topic too big or too small. I'm Jillian Ehrlich, family nurse practitioner, certified in Ayurveda and functional medicine. And today we have with us a rheumatologist. Now, rheumatology is like as old as the hills, and we're going to talk about what that is today. And we're talking with Dr. Aly Cohen, who is a triple board certified rheumatologist, integrative medicine doctor, and internist. Like soup to nuts, that's this gal. So she's also an environmental health expert in Princeton, New Jersey. She's collaborated with the Environmental Working Group, Cancer Schmancer, and other disease prevention organizations, and is co-editor of the textbook Integrative Environmental Medicine, part of the Oxford University Press Weill Integrative Medicine Library. That came out in 2017. She lectures nationally on environmental health topics for elementary and high schools, colleges, universities, medical schools, and physician training programs. And she's a regular expert guest for television, print, and podcasts. In 2015, she created the smarthuman.com to share environmental health, disease prevention, and wellness information with the public, and she's working to integrate environmental health information into high school curricula nationwide. Her TEDx talk, How to Protect Your Kids from Toxic Chemicals, can be found on YouTube, and you can follow her health and wellness tips and recommendations on Facebook at The Smart Human, Twitter and Instagram at The Smart Human. Sign up for The Smart Human newsletter, read her latest posts at thesmarthuman.com, and listen to her podcast, The Smart Human. Really, you cannot get enough of this gal. So Dr. Cohen lives on a farm in New Jersey with her husband, 2 sons, and lots of furry friends. And she has a new book that literally dropped yesterday. It's called Non-Toxic: Guide to Living Healthy in a Chemical World. And we have her on today to talk all about what is rheumatology, what are toxins, how can we think about categories of toxins, and what can we do about them. So Aly, welcome. We're so glad to have you.
Well, thank you for having me and that beautiful intro. I get no confidence at home. My kids yell at me. So this is already, I'm excited. So thank you for that.
See how smart you are? This is great. Let's get started. You're a doctor, but you're not just any kind of doctor. You're a rheumatologist. So that's an old word. Help us understand the old definition and description of rheumatology and how that's changing.
So in rheumatology, if you break down the word rheuma, it really comes from the old school thought process that rumors or, bad things travel through the body and through the joints. And so technically speaking, rheumatologists are known as joint doctors that deal with, osteoarthritis from wear and tear, or rheumatoid arthritis, which is an autoimmune disease, Lyme disease, gout, anything that affects joints. It is kind of expanded over the years. And we're dealing with a lot of other things that don't necessarily affect the joints, like polymyalgia rheumatica, which is more muscle related, and polymyositis. But essentially, we cover quite a bit of the autoimmune diseases, lupus, rheumatoid, and a variety of others. So interesting field. I found it interesting. And so that was my fellowship off of internal medicine. And I'm thrilled to actually do it because it's a lot of fun.
And it really seems like the new rheumatology is more of an immune specialty because so much of joint pain is inflammation. And so rheumatology is really seems like it's transitioning into an immune specialty.
Yeah, it's interesting, when you pick your specialty back in the day, and you're young and you're kind of right out of training, you sort of think about, okay, what's the lifestyle going to be like? Am I going to have to get at 3 a.m? Do I make enough money? Are there procedures? Am I going to, be respected? There's all these other random questions that you think about. It turns out that rheumatology is one of the key specialties in what we're dealing with now. I mean, now because of autoimmune disease that's been on the rise, and we have, essentially 1 to 10% of the U.S. population has autoimmune disease, and even worldwide. And of course, now with COVID, which we can talk about how chemicals affect the human body in terms of inflammatory response, really critical now with COVID response, in terms of how the body responds. Everyone can get infected with a virus such as coronavirus, but it's how the human body responds that differentiates one human being from another. And a big push on this book last minute, because we were sending it to press, was how do we teach people the connection that it's not just great for preventing cancers and autoimmune disease to follow these recommendations, but really to avoid having a dramatic inflammatory response to coronavirus should and if one should get infected.
And we're seeing now more and more of these long haulers, people kind of really struggling. Their bodies can't recover from it.
And that's pretty amazing. But, it's interesting because we're used to that in rheumatology from chronic Lyme disease, from fibromyalgia. We see these long haulers in a lot of different conditions. So it's not unusual for us. We don't roll our eyes and say, oh, you're crazy, or no one's listening, like, I can't handle this, go back and take some Tylenol. And what we're seeing now is like, this is in line with what we're used to managing and believing our patients to be suffering from. So I believe there's, not just joint pain and muscle achiness, certainly shortness of breath and some cardiac issues we know, but also insomnia, which is turning out to be quite an issue. And of course, loss of taste that doesn't return. And so we have sensory, muscle, joint, heart. I mean, it's like nothing's sort of off the table, unfortunately.
The patients that I'm seeing, it feels like someone took a snow globe where your body has kind of decided its immune response and settled things over your life and just shook it up. And so anything that's ever happened to you is now kind of back open. It's like all the cupboards have been open. Everything is, the immune system's like, should I be worried about this? Should I think about this? Should I do this?
Right. I mean, it's one of those things where, gosh, we've never seen anything like this before. I mean, even the Spanish flu, which, lasted a year and a half, but really was much more contained after they kind of knew that it was active. And, we didn't have such a global way of living back then. Much more contained. And now it's just like, people are on airplanes and infecting whole towns and cities. And, so it's just a different set of rules. And every day we're finding out medically. I mean, I follow all the medical blogs as you do, and your practice does. And it's almost like every day it's like, really? That too? Really? That too? I mean, it's like never ending.
One thing that's really changed in our modern life is how much we're moving around. But there's some other things that have changed in our modern life, which is what your book is about. So tell us what you're writing about.
I really, just to put it really bluntly, is I was starting to get pissed, that the world around us is so freaking dirty. And, I didn't know this. The introduction of the book actually gives a long hauled story of how I got into this environmental health, because I certainly wouldn't be here if it had not been for the fact that my dog, very early on when I was a new mom, actually, he was a new puppy. He was 3.5 years old when he got really, really sick. And, it turned out he had autoimmune hepatitis, which is unbelievably rare for dogs, but especially for golden retrievers. And he was my firstborn. So I was really heartbroken. And when I was learning more about him and how he could have gotten sick, because we live in a farm in New Jersey, which is the garden state with lots of pesticides sprayed, especially out our backyard, by farmers. And I was wondering about his water, whether his water was really clean. I was wondering about his food, whether it might have been contaminated, pesticides, his toy, especially that he had in his mouth, plastic red toy. It's a very popular toy that he never let out of his mouth, even while he slept. So I was reviewing and wondering and pining away about this dog and trying to figure out all the things could have caused him harm. And I, unveiled all of these regulatory issues that I didn't even know existed, that showed how there's such a lack of oversight of chemicals that get into everything we love, and they're never tested for toxic reactions or safety, especially in young children and pregnant women, before they're added to those products and put on the shelf. And I was like wide-eyed, and I couldn't believe this is what was going on. And why hadn't I not heard about this in medical school or even biology class in high school? I mean, this should be something that we are aware of. And that's, an issue that we have in the United States where, the markets are really biased towards manufacturers. And there's so much limited regulatory oversight on them and requirements for them. So it takes third-party academic institutions like, Fred von Saal, who is my co-author on this book, who spent his whole career and still does researching environmental chemicals as endocrine disruptors that affect the hormone system. He's the guy that actually, his research, along with his international colleagues, discovered BPA, or bisphenol A, was an endocrine disruptor and affects human hormones, particularly infants and newborns, and was able to, after years of work and research, to get the United States to remove it from plastic baby bottles in 2012. So that's my partner, and I'm honored and humbled to be working with him on 2 books now. So I think the science is right, and thank God he's on board for that, because he's a real classic emeritus kind of interesting researcher. Anyway, so that's where we are right now. And I was just angry and I wanted to find out more. And then the more I learned, the more I felt, why doesn't anyone else know this? Why is there not a book out there that can teach me what I'm learning over these 8 years? And I essentially put it all in a book with Fred, Dr. von Saal. And, we really got the regulatory story correct on a lot of these chemicals because that's his world. We got the clinical and immunologic story correct on my world. And I see the downstream effects of these chemicals. I'm seeing younger people with thyroid disease, thyroid cancer, breast cancer, autoimmune diseases. I'm getting them and I'm kind of pissed. So, it was kind of my reaction. So long answer to your question, but that's really how I'm here.
Let's talk a little bit about those toxins. How do we think about the categories of toxins that impact us? And your TED Talk goes into this a little bit, but can you kind of walk us through how we can think about whoever you are that's listening, so when our listeners can kind of look around themselves right now in this moment, whether they're in their car, on a walk, in their house, how do you think about the things that might be impacting you?
So I look at it as like a body survey. And, when you walk into your home, what gets on your body, in your body, what do you put in your body, on your body, what surrounds you, your lungs, what do you inhale? And how can we reduce those? Because to know that many of the chemicals in air fresheners, carpet powders, cleaning products that are not necessarily looked up and vetted for safety, which I give all those resources in the book. We work with Environmental Working Group, which is a wonderful resource, but there's others in the book, recipes for cleaning products that are cleaner and safer. So, I look at it as a body survey. You want to look at what really is coming into your body and affecting it potentially and getting into the bloodstream, breast milk, urine. So the first thing I tell patients is, what do you spray in your home? One of the first things you can do is just remove chemicals, don't buy them. It's so much cheaper than buying stuff. So the first step is just to not buy it and bring it in your home where it can get into your body, get into dust on the floor where cats and dogs and children, put them on their hands and toys and it gets stuck and they put it in their mouth. So you really want to think about if you remove the stuff by either chucking it. I had a whole drawer of air fresheners at one point that were like liquid. You plugged them in.
Uh-huh.
They were like berry breeze and ocean view and, like mountain air. And I thought to myself, am I going to really feel like that when I plug these in? Or am I going to feel like this is nasty and I'm inhaling toxic chemicals that are untested? And it took that little sort of switch to take an entire drawer, 30 of them, and chuck them.
Wow.
And I think that when we start to kind of unload, it's really refreshing. It really is.
Things that are in us, that are food, things that are on us with our body products are clean, and things that are around us, our cleaning products, our air, our water.
And feminine care products, I want to mention that because I think a lot of women and parents of young girls should be thinking about, thinking about the chemicals that are in tampons. I mean, easy subject, but let me tell you, they are filled with pesticides for cotton. If they're not cotton, they're made out of rayon or synthetic fibers that we know are plastic. They may have been sprayed with perfumes that have phthalates that are endocrine disruptors, a class of endocrine disruptors that affect estrogen at low levels and androgens and a bunch of other hormones in the body. And what's really striking is that the vaginal canal is actually super absorbent. It's similar in tissue in terms of absorbency to the mouth, which we know there are medications that many of us take that are sublingual or under the tongue. I do that with patients with vitamin D and a bunch of other medicines. So that's very similar tissue. And so what that means is that whatever we put in intravaginally, things with feminine care products, sprays, douches, tampons, those kind of things, absorb quite readily into the human body. And you can measure it. Medications like estrogens that are creams, you can measure those in the bloodstream within hours. So, I just want people to know that there's all different routes into the body: air, food, water, intravaginally, so let's think about all those and try to just make them cleaner. That's all.
So what do you recommend instead of tampons? Just to kind of...
I don't mind tampons at all. I think they're fabulous. I mean, but they should be organic if you can find them. And now they're found at every big box store. I remember jogging and running into a CVS or a big box store, I can't remember what, in Miami. And I was like, oh no, I got to get a tampon. And I ran in there and I was like, no way, they carry their own organic line. Okay. So, it's just really interesting how this movement is moving fast. And, look, maybe they're not doing it for altruistic reasons. If they are, fabulous. But if they're doing it for financial reasons, then, people can help move the market by purchasing power. And, if we want these products and they want to make money, then so be it. But they have to be vetted and real organic products and not kind of organic washed, so to speak, where they have one ingredient that's organic and the rest are crap. Which a lot of products in personal care do that because there's no regulations on organics in personal care. So you really have to kind of vet it out a little bit. But again, we have resources to do that and very simple, apps, websites. It's super easy for people to kind of jump in. You don't have to have any scientific background. You don't have to have money particularly. You don't have to be loaded. You just have to be able to be willing to explore this journey.
Let's talk about some of these chemicals themselves. How do the people who make the chemicals think about the categories of toxins? Like, what are endocrine disruptors? What are neurotoxins? What are these things?
So there's lots of ways to kind of hit the topic of environmental chemicals. So you can separate them by their molecular structure. You can separate them by their function in terms of what they do, like non-stick chemicals, degreasing chemicals, perfumes. You can separate them out by what their physiologic effects are, like as a neurotoxin or as a liver toxin, by, that kind of categorization. So it's just, there's a lot of ways to piecemeal this all together. What's panned out is this incredible group of researchers internationally with robust information on endocrine disruptors in terms of their physiologic function. So that's what I can talk about now, because there's so many chemicals that fall under that header. Mm-hmm. So endocrine disruptors are basically chemicals that are man-made. Well, I shouldn't say that entirely, because actually soy genistein is a part of soy, which is a natural component, which is an endocrine disruptor in some ways too. And there are medications that are endocrine disruptors, like tamoxifen, if it's not given properly in terms of its dosing. So not that people should stop tamoxifen, it's just how it's dosed. And that's in the book, by the way. But endocrine disruptors are a class of chemicals that basically are capable of messing with our hormones, disrupting hormones. And it's whether they either make the body not produce enough, or make too little, or they affect the receptor, which is basically the something that catches that hormone when it goes through the body and goes to an organ to make that organ do something. Hormones are signalers. That's all they are. They're basically a messenger system. And these kind of chemicals, this class of chemicals, can mess up that signal in any variety of ways. We know specifically that they can mimic estrogen. So they kind of can add estrogen to someone's body. And we know that that's a problem, given that a lot of cancers that are estrogen driven, endometrial cancer, uterine cancer, breast cancer, certainly PCOS and polycystic ovarian syndrome. So all of the estrogen driven illnesses we really need to be careful of, because these chemicals can mimic estrogen and sort of add to and pile on. Okay. Yeah. In terms of androgen blockers, so blocking testosterone is another way that these can work. And when they block testosterone, we can see issues in newborns, believe it or not, where male genitalia are not formed properly or not fully formed. And this has become very well known in terms of the, developmental biologists who have reported on this. And of course, even obstetrician gynecologists and all of the endocrine society, American Academy of Pediatrics already knows about the endocrine disruptors and has put out papers, World Health Organization. So this is not something that's a small thing. And so these, there's also thyroid hormone, right? Thyroid is a hormone that affects metabolism. We know a lot more thyroid diseases are out there now, which is worrisome. And that can come from endocrine disruptors that can jump into the thyroid gland and sort of take the place of healthier components like iodine, which we need to thrive. So, and we talk about a lot of this in the book. There's other hormones that are important for fertility. So infertility has gone on over the last decade or so. And it's not just because women are perhaps, having babies later or career options or what have you. It's really also specific to environmental chemicals. Growth and development of the brain for in utero exposure, autism. Again, autoimmune disease is affected by the endocrine system. As well, we have osteoporosis effects, believe it or not. That's an endocrine system effect. Diabetes and insulin resistance. Insulin is a hormone. So, not to make everyone freaked out who's listening, but I would be freaked out. But, the idea is that I'm pointing this out as the problem so people can understand that there's really great solutions. And if there wasn't a solution, like for the Smart Human, my platform, like on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, thesmarthuman.com, if there's not a solution, I don't post on it. Just don't feel the need to freak people out and give them fear without a solution. And I believe there's a solution for everything. And even if it's not an aggressive or, widely known solution, but there's something for every problem, there's a solution. And so that's kind of what I'm all about, the solutions.
Top 3 solutions for kind of avoiding or getting rid of endocrine disruption influences in your life. What would be your top 3?
Top 1 is don't buy it to begin with. Well, that's a variety. That's great. So don't buy household cleaners that you haven't tested if you're not going to make your own. Okay. And there's plenty of ways to make your own with really just white vinegar and baking soda and lemon and sea salt for scrubbing. So we give all those, recipes, which, I don't have time for, but if people want to do it, that's great. Otherwise, you can look up the products that are considered safe by toxicologists who look them up. But don't buy things that are kind of superfluous, like air fresheners, that we spray thinking they're going to clean our air, which is not true. It's the exact opposite. Carpet powders and all different types of cleaning stuff that now exists that's just absurd. Lawn products, lawn care, having a lawn care service to me is absurd. Just cut your lawn low so you don't track in chemicals into your home. That saves money. Get rid of them. Plastic water bottles, if you get a filtration system anywhere along the algorithm of, or I should say from the least to the most aggressive in cost, you can go with carbon filter pitchers and refrigerator pitchers and filters. And, there's a whole host of those we talk about, all the way to reverse osmosis water filters, which are fabulous. And now they're not even that costly. They're about $300 and about $150 for the plumber to put it in 1 hour, and then $40 a year to change out the cartridges. So once you get that system in, you've paid off all those plastic bottles you brought home and will bring home. So there's a lot of solutions here that have a lot more to do with not buying things, or at least buying things that end up being more cost effective than anything else. And so that's kind of the first direction I like people to go with. And then you can work on one thing at a time, like for instance, personal care products. You can sit down and kind of go through the 12 products that women generally use on a daily basis. Shampoo, conditioner, nail polish, what have you. Men typically use about 6 products daily. And of course, right? We hope more. But, and then teenagers use a whopping 15 to 17 per day, which is why I teach high school. And it's why I want this in high schools nationally. Yeah. Because they are filled with hormones, as we all know. And those periods of development actually matter a great deal in terms of vulnerability to these chemicals. And so I think it's just a really perfect age group to hit up with great health and wellness and environmental health information. I hope that answers a lot of your questions, but there's a lot more that we can do. It's just a journey. And so I don't want people to think they have to do everything overnight, even like cooking utensils and cooking pans, and there's just so much you can do. It's just, you can't flip out. You have to do it one by one. It took me like 5 years to get rid of my toxic couches, literally, because we didn't have the money to just buy another couch. I mean, not many people have a couple grand to just throw a couch around, So I think you have to do what works for your budget and work with your sanity and do it as a journey.
And what I'm hearing you say is really start with the things that are small and easy and pretty fluid. So, a couch is something that sits in your house. Paint in your house is something that sits in your house. But a cleaning product, like a counter cleaning product, is something that you're going to be purchasing. Hopefully, you're going to be cleaning your house. So those are things that are fluid and in flux. And so the next time that you go shopping, just think about buying one thing differently. Or take a peek at your book and look at some of the recipes for cleaning and just make one of those cleaning change outs. You could even do that monthly. A lot of times I think about it's the same way we make health changes in visits, right? So you just want to keep the pointy end moving forward. You just want to keep slow but persistent progress.
Yeah. And I think, it hits a tipping point where pretty much, when I was drinking a whole bunch of crappy diet sodas, I got to the point where it was just disgusting. Like now if I taste a soda, I'm nauseous because I can actually taste the chemicals because I've dumbed down my sensitivity. So there's a journey where you almost have a tipping point, and I think that feels pretty good. But to start out even with like habits, like what do you drink for tea or coffee? Can you have an organic version where we know that in food, organic actually means something and has less pesticides in the food system? So we have this organic labeling that's quite important. Yeah. And, isn't it better to heat up something that's organic because of all of the chemicals from manufacturing and pesticides and food packaging and that get into tea or coffee? And then we heat it up and we're like, yum, I've got a cup full of chemicals. This is fabulous. This is great. So I kind of work on those habits. I actually posted a video about that on the Amazon website for the book. At the very bottom, it allows you to upload videos. So I just kind of did a 2-minute video on tea and coffee. So yeah, it's just, you start with low-hanging fruit, habits that you do every day, and just try to tweak a little bit at a time. It took me like 6 months to a year to figure out that the tea was organic, but then the kettle wasn't so great. Or like the diffuser was plastic when it could have been metal. It's almost surprising to me that it's not obvious to me.
A lot of functional medicine worlds or health worlds, we're talking about restriction, like don't have sugar, don't have alcohol, don't have coffee, don't have, all of these things that we're used to having that we kind of like and make us feel good. And in this realm, we're not talking about actually restricting. We're just talking about making sure that those things that we love and enjoy are healthy for us and not filled with chemicals. And those things, including coffee, alcohol, and sugar, are things that humans have been enjoying for as long as we've been humans.
I think you hit on a great point. The thing is, I'm a realist.
Yeah.
And, I color my hair, as you're seeing through the screen right now. I did this on my TED Talk. I actually threw myself under the bus and discussed that because we are human. We like looking pretty, we like good food, we socialize. And I'm one of you, I'm one of everyone else. And, I had to call myself out on it because I didn't want someone getting to it first. But the idea is that I haven't decided whether or not I'm going to color my hair for the future. I'm committed right now, but we'll see. But, I also made a million other changes I could come up with to compensate. And, when you're having your tea and coffee or things that you enjoy, like we talk about beer and wine in the book, because I love to drink beer and occasionally wine, but mostly beer. And I'd like people to know that they can do a cleaner version of almost any of their habits, whether they're good habits or bad habits. M&Ms can be found without chemicals, believe it or not.
Yeah.
So, natural versions of those. So I just try to give people guidance into just cleaning or do a cleaner version of what their habits already are. And then they can work on whether or not it's good for them long-term with their doctors, and they can discuss that as well at some point. But the chemical aspect is the lens that I look at.
Yes. Oh, it's such a good one. It's such a good one. One of the things I love about your book is that it is factual and it's sharp, and it's both the history of all these chemicals, because that's kind of fascinating about how did we get here? And then you give these lists. So it's like the in-depth description of the history, what it is, and then the cliff notes on what to do about it. So let's start talking a little bit about the history. How did we get here? But, people who make chemicals have families. We're going to assume they love their children. How did we get here?
Well, we've been here for a lot more years than you think. I mean, we were making, the ancient Greeks were making lead pots, and they didn't necessarily know there was lead, but they were figuring out why people were stumbling around ancient Greece. And they kind of put it together that there were lead in the pots. And we talk about some of our ancient foibles in relation to where we are now, because look, we have our foibles. In the 1950s, there was a huge explosion of chemical development for good, right? We wanted to fight the war, World War II. We wanted to have pesticides to fight the bugs that were, attacking our troops. We wanted to store food to be able to send it overseas in cans. There was a lot of good that came out of the 1950s because we needed better resources to use instead of our land, steel and wood, and all of these things were so precious that they came up with plastics that were more, you could drop them and they wouldn't break and they would last forever. And, housewives didn't want to have to, wash dishes. So there's, single-use plastics and all of that. But we also had naugahyde and rayon and formica and plexiglass and all these chemical additives for gasoline to make gasoline work better and more efficiently. So the 1950s was a huge boom. The problem is that no one saw how these were going to be broken down in the environment, if they were going to chemicals that would get into human health, in human bodies, which we'd never kind of conceived of back then. Rachel Carson, of course, our famous Rachel Carson in the 1950s, who's a biologist, incredible researcher. She discovered that these chemicals were first affecting wildlife in terms of birds having thinner eggs and not being able to produce chicklets that were, fully formed or not enough of them. So it was the canary in the coal mine, and she sounded the call back in the 1950s with Silent Spring, if anyone wants to read that. But she got us going thinking how, these chemicals are making their way into waterways and into ecosystems and kind of disrupting things there. I think it took a lot longer for people to think that we were anything like, birds and other animals, to think that, we have those same organs too, believe it or not. Yeah. And hormones, just like these animals. So the 1950s brought about good, but also some stuff that we now see wasn't forethought. And that's why there's so much now, emphasis on green chemistry, on how do we create items for our lives that have a story that ends with it breaking down and being part of our earth and our ecosystem and not part of our bodies permanently. So I think that's a really interesting thing. There was a chapter in our textbook that you mentioned in the intro called Integrative Environmental Medicine, which is a textbook we did. And one of the chapters was written by Dr. Terrence Collins from Carnegie Mellon, and he is just renowned green science guy. And his chapter is fascinating. If you are out there and you're interested in that kind of work, I had a friend who said her son was starting college for engineering and wanted to do cleaner products. And I said, you should really have him look up this chapter. I mean, it's a wonderful chapter. So, here we are. We're in this pickle. And we have to clean up the earth, but we also have to clean up our bodies. And I think they go hand in hand. My friend and collaborator at Princeton University, head of sustainability, and I are putting together some programs to try to show people how the environment and the human body are very similar and how they interact. And to know one piece without the other is not the full story. So we're looking forward to doing some work together in the future.
Okay, so that's a good take-home point that people started this out of trying to solve a problem. They saw a problem, they made up a solution, and lo and behold, the solution has had some unintended consequences. Right. And so we as individuals, we who are struggling with osteoarthritis and early mortality, shortening of our lives, and autoimmune disease and autistic children, and those of us who are struggling now are left kind of picking up the pieces. And so the choices that we make on a daily basis actually can impact both our health and that of the world. If we put our money where our mouths are, that's kind of what talks in our society. So that's good. That's a good way to think about it.
I'll give you an example that just occurred to me. So for instance, tampons that we talked about.
Yeah.
So tampons we have plastic casing for a lot of those tampon companies, right? And those plastics don't break down. They're considered medical waste. They don't get recycled. And you can imagine how much of that plastic casing is in the world right now. That's
just piles and piles.
I mean, just piles of tampon casing. So in addition to choosing organic tampons, you can choose ones that have cardboard
applicators.
Thank you. And so you're also making a choice to save the world on some level. So I love how people can kind of do both if they put their mind to it. And I think it's a challenge, but it's certainly worth trying.
Let's talk about some of the other recommendations, because your chapters in your new book, I'm going to spoiler alert, are really broken down by the things that are in us, on us, and around us. So you do talk about things like endocrine disruptors and neurotoxins of pesticides, et cetera. But your chapters are really broken down by, I'm just going to list them here so people can know what they're headed for. Food, water, medications, air, personal care products, cleaning agents, crop chemicals, home chemicals, radiation, and then you've got a bunch of different appendices with like gym tips and travel tips and recipes. So let's kind of dive into a few of these that may not be so obvious, like medications. Talk to us a little bit about what toxic chemicals could possibly be in medications.
So I'll just mention one more chapter that's really important in the very beginning is what to know before you get pregnant and when you're pregnant.
Oh, yes.
And parenting.
Yes.
Because I want people to understand that there's ways to clean your body before you get ready to get pregnant.
Yeah.
And oops, if you get pregnant, okay, that happens to quite a few of us. Then, okay, what do you do now that you are pregnant? And then what do you do when the, little guy comes out? And how do you keep them clean when they're, younger and, breastfeeding and all that? So I just want to mention that was really loaded up front because it's such an important topic.
Some things that we've talked about before in the show are that our first 1,000 days are the most important of our life. They really set our trajectories. In utero is a really important time in terms of setting up methylation patterns. And so if you're fraught with chemicals, your body is going to be on guard from the beginning. And Ayurveda actually has recommended these last, 5 to 10,000 years that a person should do what's called panchakarma, or a 5-day detox program, or 5 to 30 days, depending on whether you're here or in India or where you are in the world, and what you can kind of manage in your lifestyle and your pocketbook. But doing some sort of panchakarma, doing some sort of deep detox, I typically tell patients that life prioritizes the living. So any chemicals that are in you are generally going to get kind of downloaded because you need to stay alive. So a lot of that stuff is good to get out of your system first. And that body burden study by Environmental Working Group in 2005 recognized an average of 287 toxic chemicals in the cord blood of newborns. So I did not write your book, you wrote your book, and I know I'm talking a lot about this, but it is a real point of contention because how we take care of what Ayurveda calls the field before the seeds are laid, that's literally the language they use about it, how an infant is incubated, how a fetus is incubated, and then those first 1,000 days really sets the health trajectory for life. Like you can set how you're going to die with some of those early patterns. So when you think about your children living long, healthy lives, you want to think about how you start them out.
And that's amazing. And I'm so happy you brought all that up, because really we also talk about early on as epigenetic changes, which is, really exposures to many chemicals in utero in a pregnant woman affects not only the mom, that exposure, whatever it may be. And it could be stress. It could be synthetic light. It could be noise pollution. It could be poor sleep. It could be chemicals. It could be anything she eats or drinks or puts in her body or on her body. But that affects essentially not just her body, but the 2 more generations, because you're not only affecting the fetus, but you're also affecting the germ cells of that fetus. So if it's an infant female, you got all of those eggs in there developing in utero, and germ cells for males. So you're affecting 3 generations at once. And we now know that some of those chemicals can actually have genetic changes, not just to a mom, but really to her offspring. So I know it sounds really daunting and horrible, but again, it just emphasizes, in my opinion, we've got to just get on it and think about it and think about ways to just make our bodies clean. I urge everyone out there who has access to a young person who's going to get pregnant one day, whether intentionally or not, we hope not, not intentionally, but really think about this as sort of a guidebook for a healthy life, as you're saying, from the very start onward. So that's really the emphasis there. And I wish I had done a lot of things differently. I mean, no way was I into this stuff when I was having kids. I was cleaner, but I was still eating Cheese Whiz and, Oreos and drinking Dr. Pepper and, and then I'd have a salad, and then I'd have McDonald's. What did I eat? I ate a lot of, chocolate chip pancakes. So that's when my kid likes pancakes, I think. So, we do better when we know better. That's all.
And early in pregnancy, that first trimester, really, we do crave, there's so much cell division, there's so much activity. We are not necessarily craving salad, right? You really want carbs and heavier foods and stabilizing foods. So again, this is not about restriction. You're not supposed to be keto or paleo necessarily while you're in your first trimester of pregnancy. And in fact, Ayurveda says the pregnant woman should always be happy. They should go with whatever they crave. But again, it's just a trade out for things without chemicals. So you can have the chocolate chip pancakes, just, organic chocolate chips and healthy grains and healthy oils. So it's not about restriction. It's just about non-chemical lens.
Yeah. And I think that's a brilliant way to put it. Like I said, there's a hack for everything out there in this day and age. Oreo hacks that are delicious. I have some in my closet. I mean, there are hacks for everything. And so the question is just making better choices. And that's what the book's about. It's just helping guide people to better choices. And here's how to do it.
So let's dive into medications. Talk to us a little bit, because we are, we're medical people, so we prescribe medications.
I'm not against medications. So people always either come to my practice or call me and say, I've been suffering with rheumatoid for 5-6 years, and I'm, I don't want to be on meds, and they come in and their hands are swollen and they're in pain. And I mean, life is just miserable. And for some people, I'm like, listen, you need to be on a medication. Diet is not entirely working. Supplements, everything you've tried is not working, and you can't live like this. So medications, really serve a wonderful purpose, especially in the world of rheumatology, which is essential, or else lupus patients die or have lupus nephritis, or people lose vision or what have you. So I just like people to really balance out what we need and what's is really urgently needed versus what we kind of take just because we think it's a reasonable idea and it's there and it's instant gratification, and not understanding sort of the repercussions of a lot of long-term medications. And many medications weren't even designed for other than one outcome. And the problem with that is because you're also not seeing how these drugs work with other medications, which are often taken together. They synergize with environmental chemicals like endocrine disruptors. So we know that little soup of chemicals can be a problem in terms of inflammation and side effects and risk. We know that oral medications, not just antibiotics, but a whole host of medications affect the gut microbiome, which is our healthful, plentiful bacteria, molds, yeast, everything that lives in our gut, our 24 feet of bowel that keep us healthy, our immune system's healthy, keep our mental health healthy through the gut-brain connection. So, the book lays out in categories statins, I think I did anti-reflux medications. And I just did a couple paragraphs just kind of showing people what the risks are. And then, mention, resources and alternatives. So, the idea that we have to go big or go home with meds is really not true at this point. We have enough tools. We have Ayurvedic medicine, ancient Chinese medicine. We have integrative and functional medicine. There's so many great things that have been used for generations to help with acid reflux and cholesterol and blood pressure that we just don't know about because of the marketing onslaught by pharma. So we just want to kind of pull back a little bit and see what else is available. That's all.
And medications, it seems like, just like chemicals, were designed to solve a problem, but then that problem that they solve leaves us with other problems. So using a medication, even temporarily or maybe forever, but it needs to only be part of the healthcare solution.
Yeah, I think that's really important. Again, it's the way I look at integrative medicine, which is my background, is, you can take medications and you can do integrative approaches as well through diet, nutrition, supplements. That's how I get the best outcomes in many of my patients, because it's not just, kumbaya and meditation and, dancing around your yard. It's not just that. It's vetted supplements that have evidence-based studies. That's what I like to stick to. But it's also the medications that we can now use at a lower dose. Yeah. Or maybe we don't have to stay on that medication forever. Maybe that was just a bridge to getting someone into remission or feeling better through their lifestyle that took a little longer. Yeah. So there's all different ways to do this. And medications are a tool just like everything else is a tool. And it's how you integrate them for the most efficient outcomes is the way I look at it.
In these last few minutes, let's talk a little bit more about the resources, because that is one thing that I was struck by. I've been in this world a long time, 2 decades. And one of the things I was struck by was how many resources you brought out that I had literally never heard of. I was like, what? Oh my God. Where are these people? Who are these people? So talk to us a little bit about the resources and where we can find more information in your, what you know. How do we know more about what you know?
So I'll tell you, the book is one beautiful thing that I'm so proud of and I'm glad to get out into the world. But what I wanted to also do a few years back was post on what I'm learning as I'm going. And so I started the Smart Human platform, again, out of frustration that I didn't see anything out there that kind of appealed to me and was quick and, give me some salient, quick points, nuggets, teach me this in one post and tell me what the solution is in one post. Mm-hmm. Because I think people don't have the attention span to be barraged with so many topics. So I do them once at a time. But anyway, so Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, The Smart Human. And then, of course, the website collects a lot of the podcasts that I do and some, articles that I write and any interesting information that's worth sharing as a post. It goes to thesmarthuman.com. And there's resources and fun facts and kind of things like that. But, the idea was that it lives beyond the book. And I wanted people to have ongoing information shared with them on nutrition. I do Mental Health Fridays. Which is usually something very funny if you get my humor. Someone had created during quarantine a kind of like a mini museum of art for their gerbils. And literally, down to the detail, had all the classic artists, these little, art pictures, and then put it in this little box, and had the gerbils looking around and running. It was hysterical on video. So, these are the kind of things that I think people need to see because it's just life is really hard right now. But the platform is really a way for me to share heavy hitter material on Wednesdays, which is usually a deep dive topic with, a lot of bullets with, what to do. Mondays are usually sustainability topics of who's getting rid of, plastics, single serve plastics like Europe, or cool, innovative sustainability things about the ocean or lawn care or what have you. And then Wednesdays are more physiologic in terms of, personal care, nutrition. These are written posts. I write them and I tee them up, and I now have to do another 2 months worth. But Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Facebook is my favorite place to post because it's really a lot of good information. Instagram is a little bit more for the younger crowd. I have to do funnier things, more interesting pictures, a little more about myself and my family, some celebrity stuff. I mean, it's just a different personality. So I kind of post differently so people don't get bored. So yeah, I mean, that's really lives beyond the book. And so I hope people will find that, additive to their lives on a regular basis.
Great. And tell us a little bit about the farm you live on.
So I lived in the city for training for, I guess I did my residency and in New York City at Beth Israel, and I did my fellowship training in autoimmune disease and rheumatology at Montefiore in the Bronx. So I saw a lot of cement in my training years in Philly, I think before then. So I grew up on a farm in Pennsylvania, so I knew I was always going to go back to something like that. But it turns out I met a man that really loved creative structures. I personally just wanted furniture that wasn't cheap and a house that had a roof. But he was all into, interesting structures. So he discovered this farm in not in Princeton, but in a local area in central New Jersey. And he's like, have you ever been to this town? I'm like, no. I said, I grew up near there, but I never even been to that town. And it turns out it's like this 100-year-old dairy barn that no one wanted. And we renovated it before we had kids because no way would we get anything done with kids. And so, yeah, we live in a 100-year-old dairy barn in a very farmed section of New Jersey. So, I'm managing glyphosate spraying right now with a local farmer. These are kind of old school, and it's very funny. I'm actually considering putting together a documentary about it because I'm dealing with like these aged farmers with like leather hands and, they just politically and philosophically do not line up. And yet I'm having beers with them and bringing over textbooks and chapter sections. And I'm posting, Mexico just banned glyphosate. It's just remarkable what I feel like I'm trying to do here. But anyway, so yeah, that's my world. And so it's personal to me. A lot of these topics are very personal to me. And I think that comes through in the introduction, but it's going to continue throughout my time here on Earth. So, that's it.
Great. Well, we are so lucky to have you not only on the podcast today, but in the world doing the work you're doing. I'm really grateful. I'm really excited. It's definitely a passion of mine from my Outward Bound years when we were just in these wood boats out, with plastic buckets, but we used a lot of, out in the ocean. So glad to have you here today. Thank you everybody for listening today with Dr. Aly Cohen. We've got lots of ways to continue this conversation through Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can also get more information from and about her at smarthuman.com, at her Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook pages, and more about us at our website, centerforhealingneurology.com, and our Twitter, Facebook, and website. Even better, come see us in person. Come see her in person in New Jersey, us in Seattle. Please be sure to share this show with your friends, and we welcome your rating and review wherever you get your podcasts, and feel free to send topic requests to podcast@centerforhealingneurology.com. We love that you've joined us today to discuss how to make our whole world medicine. We rise or fall together, and we are committed to doing what we can to make as many of us as healthy as possible. And this takes all of us, including you. Thank you for listening, and see you next time.
Fish Media.
Partyfish Media acknowledges that it operates and records on indigenous Duwamish and Puget Sound Coast Salish land that is still home to the Duwamish tribe. This land is stolen in violation of the Point Elliott Treaty of 1855. We are committed to uplifting the name of these lands and community members from these nations who reside alongside us. For more information on this land, its people, or ways you can help, visit duwamishtribe.org or realrentduwamish.org.